But first, let me introduce the candidates that are going to be here and ask them to come to the table. First, we'll go in order. The former governor and candidate for the Congressional District 13, former Governor Charlie Crist. Here. We have his opponent, the incumbent congressman at District 13, David Jolly. And the Senate candidate for District 19, Darrell Rousseau. I want to thank all you gentlemen for being here tonight. It's very important that you come out and hear the voices of the public, especially the public, the African American community that wants to hear certain things addressed here this evening. The first question. The political climate is dividing our country. There's no doubt about that. Not many conversations like this take place. Speak about your ability and willingness to work in a bipartisan way to help your constituents. Begin with you, State Representative Rousseau.
I want to thank you so much for this opportunity to announce that I'm running for Congressional District 13. I feel like I'm outclassed here, y'all. Got a congressman and a to-be congressman sitting right here, but thank you for this opportunity. I have worked for the past 8 years in the Florida House of Representatives to be known as a Democrat who can collaborate and be effective in the House. When the numbers are 81 to 39, 81 Republicans to 39 Democrats, who are you going to get cozy with? Who holds the power of the purse and the legislative process? And that's what I've worked to do. I have passed 16 pieces of legislation, including this year the backyard gun range bill, which was the only gun control legislation to pass both the House and the Senate, and the governor signed it. I passed the grandparents' rights bill. I expanded drug courts so that people could get treatment versus incarceration. Yeah. I passed the juvenile citation bill so that young folks could get an opportunity to get services as opposed to be put into the criminal justice system. The reason why I bring that up is because a Democrat can't pass those things alone. You have to be able to work with the Speaker of the House, the Chair of Appropriations, in order to get legislation through. I think I've been effective at that. I was always told that a legislator has 3 roles. One is to create good policy, pass good law. Well, when the numbers are 81 to 39 and you don't chair a committee or vice chair a committee, that's hard to do. The second thing we're supposed to do is stop bad policy or stop bad law from being enacted. Well, when the numbers are 81 to 39, that's hard to do too. So the third thing that you're supposed to do as a legislator is find the money. Bring appropriations home. And beginning in 2009, I've done just that every year. The first $1 million that I brought back was parked at the Department of Juvenile Justice. They created 400 jobs for at-risk youth in the 4 counties that I represented. I'm proud to say that I've been responsible for $4.1 million coming back to St. Pete College to stimulate people and motivate people into performing public service on the King Day of Service. We have some students here from USF Journalism, Neighborhood News, who are working for the Weekly Challenger and writing for them. That's through a $300,000 grant that I brought back that will preserve Black history in this city, digitize the historical importance of the Weekly Challenger, and loan them students who are getting a stipend in order to help write for that paper.
Trevor, thank you. Reverend Peterman, thank you very much. For all of you who came here this evening, thank you. And the question was, what can you do to change the tone? What can you do, or what have you done to demonstrate bipartisanship? And there is probably no riper example on what I've tried to do in the last 3 years to speak up on behalf of the entire community than this. 10 months ago, I stood in the well of the House floor and called on Donald Trump to drop out of the presidential race. I did so. And listen, when I did that, I wasn't just the only Republican that did that. I was the only Republican or Democrat. I was the only member of the House of Representatives when he started talking about the things he started talking about, to say, no, this runs against the ideals of our country, but it also runs against the ideals of my own Christian faith. And at the time, it was about a ban on Muslim immigration. And I stood on the House floor and professed my own faith in the God that I call my Jesus Christ. And I said, as a Christian, I'm calling on Donald Trump to drop out of the race based on the religious bigotry that has come out of his mouth.
Yes.
Last Friday night, when we all learned of his comments, I said, no one who boasts about sexual assault is qualified to be President of the United States. There are issues of our culture and of our country that rise above political parties, and we need leaders willing to speak to those issues. Along the way, I've tried to represent a very diverse community, work on investments in early childhood education, student readiness, student nutrition, dropout prevention, dropout reintegration, making GEDs more affordable, more accessible, investing in what I call the human potential of all people. We are all created in God's image, regardless of where we come from, regardless of the zip codes we live in, and we all deserve a Congress that works, and we all deserve a Congress and a government that partners with our churches and our community leaders to change people's lives and to give people the opportunity to create their own futures together so that we can be one nation. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. Thank you, Trevor. Thank you to each one of you.
Secretary Peterman, thank you for the pleasure of being with you. Trevor, thank you for moderating this evening. David and Senator, thank you for being here as well. I think it's an important question. How do you change the tone? How do you get things to move forward? How do you make it more decent? How do you work across the aisle? We're in exactly the right place to talk about that. The house of God. In the house of God, everybody is decent, right? But we try to be, we should be. We should be outside the house of God too, decent and respectful. That's what we're taught as little children when we go to Sunday school. Right, Pastor? We have to remember those lessons whether we're in the United States Capitol or Tallahassee, Senator, or right here in the house of God itself. And that's what I've always tried to do. Because my mother and my father, Dr. Christ, who practiced medicine here for 55 years, my mother Nancy, who was a stay-at-home mom, taught my three sisters and me that it was important to follow a very critical rule. Do unto others. It's the golden rule. That's how good it is. We call it the golden rule. And we should comport ourselves that way. So let me give you an example in my career of when I had to work across the aisle for your betterment. When I was your governor, I got elected in 2006, November 06. I'm in office about a year, and all of a sudden we entered this horrific recession. And in Tallahassee, the money stopped. It stopped everywhere. And I got married December 12, 2008. Carol and I went on our honeymoon. I came back, and in January went up to Tallahassee, getting ready for a new session. And I said to my financial advisor in the governor's office, how are we going to make ends meet? Because the Constitution says we must. And he said, I don't know, it's going to be tough, but I know the president has a plan. I said, you mean the new guy? He had just gotten elected the November before. This was January 2009. And he said, that's right, President Obama. I said, well, I'm all ears. What's the plan? He said, the plan is that he wants to have a act called the Stimulus Act, Recovery Act, that will give $12 billion to your fellow Floridians, for teachers, for law enforcement officers, for firefighters, to keep things open, to keep your home safe, to make sure if somebody burns your house that there's someone to answer the call. I said, that's a great idea. I was a Republican at the time. And so I decided to accept it. Heck, it was your money. You sent it to Washington. I thought Florida ought to get its fair share. Plus, we needed it. Well, some of my then fellow Republicans didn't like that so much. Then they expressed it to me. About a week after that, we got a call. Am I over time? I'm sorry. Anyway, we'll talk about it later.
The gathering of pastors formed after a string of gun violence in South St. Petersburg last November. If you could, each of us, give us solutions to the availability of illegal guns that are coming into our community. And we'll begin with Congressman Jolly.
Thank you for this question. This is a very human question, right? Never again. Never again should a community have to suffer gun violence. What do we do about it? How do we prevent it? We know right now that there are ways to purchase firearms that individuals shouldn't have the opportunity to do. And going to the last question about bipartisanship, I'm the only Republican in the House of Representatives to sign on to legislation to require universal background checks, to strengthen background checks, to close all the loopholes that are out there today that allow an individual to purchase a firearm that shouldn't be able to purchase a firearm. About 6 or 8 weeks ago, following the horrific shooting in Orlando, John Lewis and the Democrats led a sit-in on the House floor. And by some accounts, I was the only Republican that went down to the House floor. Now, I didn't go down to participate in the sit-in, and I wouldn't suggest otherwise. What I did is I went down to the floor to find Democrats I could work with to say, how do we put forward a bipartisan solution that my side of the aisle is willing to move, or your side of the aisle is willing to move? That my side of the aisle is willing to say, okay, we can accept a compromise here, and your side of the aisle is willing to do the same. The heartbreaking part is, I think we had the votes. About 2 a.m. one night. Myself, Alan Grayson, one of the more progressive members of the House, a number of Democrats from the Northeast, and frankly, I had Republican members from the Central Plains states. We had a deal that would have prevented terrorists and criminals from being able to purchase firearms while also protecting the Second Amendment rights of lawful individuals. We had a deal. The heartbreaking part is this. My side of the aisle killed it because of the influence of outside groups that we all know too well. The other side of the aisle killed it because of this. The number 2 leader in the House of Representatives said, we are not about to work with David Jolly to solve the gun issue because we're about to spend millions of dollars in Pinellas County on TV to try to beat him. They didn't want a solution. Both sides have unclean hands on this issue, and it's time that we listen to our better angels and we solve it. I think we can close loopholes. I think we can require universal background checks. We had a conversation with ministers today. Once that happens, once we close all the loopholes, how do we get the illegal firearms off the street, which was part of Trevor's question. And that's when we've got to find solutions. I don't sit here tonight with an answer on that. I'm a big proponent of gun buyback programs. I think if somebody has the opportunity to feed their family because they've got cash in their wallet, they'd consider bringing an illegal gun in and selling it so they can put food on the table for their house rather than having to use that gun for ill purposes. We've got a lot of work to do on this, and we need to resign over allegiances to special interest groups on both sides. I'm working today with the Brady campaign to end gun violence to figure out in a bipartisan way, how do we once and for all solve this issue of illegal guns in our communities that are used to cause tragedy too many times for heartbroken families. Thank you.
I can't, in my mind, find a more common sense, logical thing to do than to make sure that those who shouldn't have guns don't get them. And to my way of thinking, that means that you have background checks that are significant, stringent, and enforced. I also believe that you have community policing. You know, you work with good chiefs like Chief Holloway, who I have had the privilege to meet with on several occasions, and I think he's doing a marvelous job here in our St. Petersburg. We're blessed to have him. I also believe that the kind of weapons that are used in some of these horrific acts that we see around the country, assault weapons, should be banned. I'm a hunter. I believe in the Second Amendment. You should have your right to have a gun. The Constitution says so. But even as a proponent of the Second Amendment and a hunter, I don't understand why we have to have assault weapons, essentially weapons of war, available to citizens. They should be available to the military. I want them to have them. But to have them available to people across this country, and we have seen far too many acts of violence across our country in the past year, it seems to have accelerated. And it's awful. And it can be stopped. I'm confident of that. So those are the things that I would try to move forward. That would be a hard thing to do, frankly, as the congressman has experienced, because of the special interests in Washington. They're not a whole lot interested in cooperation and getting things done. And that's a shame. It's a shame for the people. It's a shame for our country. And it's a shame for children who get killed in these incidents. So I think we need to work harder. We need to strive to do better. But I'm an optimist. And I believe we can get things done. Just have to put a little more effort into it. Thank you.
This is an easy topic for me to answer. 4 things. First, ban assault weapons. Second, no fly, no buy. If you're on the no-fly list for terrorism, then you shouldn't be able to buy a gun. Thirdly, stricter requirements. I agree with stronger background checks. And 4, better storage, education of gun owners. Because a lot of these young folks are breaking into cars and getting guns out of glove compartments, or breaking into your house and getting it from under the pillow where you think it's hidden. But I'm dedicated to doing something about it. That's why when 40-year-old Cynthia Bethune was shot in the head by a hail of gunfire between some thugs, and Officer McGovern showed me her brains in the dirt that morning, I went and pulled $5,000 out of my bank account and stood on the corner of 22nd Street and 18th Avenue South and bought 117 guns back over the weekend. And it duplicated itself in the counties surrounding. We got to do something about it. That's when 24-year-old Mika got shot in the head and executed in the closet while she was visiting her dope boyfriend's house and didn't know that some drug boys would kick the door in at 3 o'clock in the morning, shoot him up, but kill her. I did a Good Girls, Bad Boys conference where we flew in the actress Kimberly Elise and had 100 young women turn out to Carter Woodson Museum to help them make decisions, better decisions, on the kinds of boys that they're going to run with, because sometimes a bad boy will get you killed. This is going to take, the solution to this is going to be all of us working together at all levels. Yes, community policing is important. Yes, stricter backgrounds is important. But as important is the community doing better storage and educating our youth in terms of the dangers of owning, possessing, and using a gun. And we need some gun reform, sentencing reform, I mean. The 1020 life law was a debacle, is that the right word? Right. Well, either way it goes, it was bad. But that's what I would work on. And lastly, this year, because of gun violence in St. Pete, I was able to convince the legislature to put $250,000 in the budget to deal with fatherlessness, youth, and gun violence in our communities through a pilot program here in St. Pete. But the governor's office vetoed it. So when I get to the Senate, if you allow me and help me get there, that's one of the first things I'm going to work on when I get back.
I think the work. Our next question. Many poor and minority communities have been put at risk by environmental violations and abuses. Flint, Michigan, for example. With our city experiencing a sewage crisis, what will you do to protect us? And we will start with former Governor Charlie Crist.
Thank you for the question. You know, it's important in public service that you pay attention to what's happening, particularly in your own backyard. And this situation that occurred in St. Petersburg and really Pinellas County probably could have been avoided. As I understand it, as it relates to St. Petersburg specifically, the prior administration unfortunately closed down one of our treatment plants. I don't know why. Somebody must have advised them to do so, but it caught up with us. And it's certainly not, you know, the most riveting issue to discuss that people are excited about. You're talking about sewage. But it's important to deal with it appropriately. Because if we don't, we risk our water. And that's not right. You know, we're surrounded by water in this state and in this county. And it occurs to me that if we care about it deeply, we need to be vigilant about doing, you know, right. Doing the blocking and tackling. As an old football player, these things may not be sexy, but they're important to be done. Because our children are at risk, our water is at risk if we don't pay attention to making sure that our infrastructure works appropriately. Now, I'm excited about the future. You know, I've listened to Secretary Clinton talk about infrastructure extensively in this campaign. Wants to spend and invest about $520 billion in new infrastructure, including roads and other infrastructure that arguably would relate to making sure that we have appropriate sewage treatment. So I hope she wins. Because that kind of leadership is what our country needs, and it would certainly benefit us right here at home.
Infrastructure is important. And one thing that government can do is create incentives so that the parallel lines, the line that's running from your house to the street, is kept up to date as the city and government replaces the street sewage system. And that's important because in economically depressed communities, folks can't afford to fix the plumbing that goes from the house to the street. And so government must provide some incentives.
This is a personal question for a lot of us in the community. Jurisdiction's important. The responsibility of sewers rests with the mayor's office. This mayor's, the previous mayor's, the one before that. Sewers are a matter of local jurisdiction. And throughout communities in Pinellas County, political leadership at times has ignored the investment required in stormwater and wastewater infrastructure. That's the reality, Republican or Democrat. There are some communities in Pinellas County that are doing very well. The city of Clearwater today will tell you how great their stormwater and wastewater is because they have invested in it over decades. Communities like Largo are under federal order to renew their wastewater lines because of possible violations or future violations. And now we've seen what's happened in the city of St. Petersburg. This is caused by neglect from City Hall. That's the bottom line. Now, I have offered my assistance to Mayor Kreisman. If we can look to identify federal resources, of which there are very few, folks, I'll be honest with you. This is on all of us as local taxpayers to determine how we invest in local infrastructure. But can there be federal funds in cases of emergency like Flint, where Congress is working to provide it? There can be in cases of true environmental disaster. But just as I offered the mayor my help, I offered the whistleblower my help. And we have had several meetings with the whistleblower now. My wife, Laura, has actually toured one of the treatment facilities with the whistleblower. You want to talk about a loving wife? She went and walked over sewage to get to the bottom of this story, right? And you know what happened? Yesterday in my office, I sat with a second whistleblower. And sometimes tough love is required. And as a result of the neglect at City Hall, there is now a law enforcement investigation as a result of my referring the information that very brave and courageous whistleblowers brought to me over to state officials to investigate the level of negligence, the level of intentional negligence. Folks, when you sit with somebody who says, I was asked to do something that I thought was wrong, so I told my supervisor, you have to give me a memo directing me to do that in writing before I'll do it. Something is wrong coming from City Hall with this sewage crisis. We can work together to solve it. But understand, this is an issue for local leadership, and then all of us as local taxpayers, including Laura and myself, are going to be on the hook for what the political decisions get made for how we fix it. And I believe in the city of St. Petersburg, it's going to mean adjusting resources away from a real pretty pier, adjusting resources away from all these nice shiny objects on Beach Drive, and make responsible decisions to invest in infrastructure that affect every community and every neighborhood in the city, not just the wealthiest ones. That's what I think.
Pinellas County schools have historically failed Black students. What role can you play, if elected, to improve our schools?
That's a good question. Again, I'm proud of the Tampa Bay Times, sit in the largest pocket of poverty in Pinellas County. And poverty affects a child's ability to learn. When Chairwoman O'Toole and I walked into Campbell's Park classroom, there was a young lady who was seated in a desk with an hourglass facing the wall with a sign above her saying "Time Out." And when we asked her why she was in timeout, she said, because I can't think today. And we said, well, what do you mean you can't think today? No, I can't think. The teacher said, I can't think today. My mommy was arrested for drugs last night, and I can't think today. We can't always ask the school to solve all of our problems of education. And I don't believe one size fits all. Those 120 students at Academy Prep, each one of them, 100% of them get Step Up for Kids voucher. Mount Zion Christian Academy, 80% of the children there, 93,000 minority children across this state get help to go to private schools because they may need just a different little tool in their toolbox to succeed in education. And who are we to deny that? Education must become more creative, more responsive, keep up with the times so that these children can learn. Because at the end of the day, the most important person in this discussion is not the school system, not the teacher, not the parents, but that child's success. So I would work hard towards both accountability for charter schools, accountability. Southside Tabernacle, just down the street, 53% of those kids get vouchers. And I don't know about you, but I know about Berkeley Prep, Shorecrest, Keswick, North Shore. Schools where children are getting the attention and the focus that they need. We need to do that for our kids too.
Say I agree with the incoming state senator from St. Petersburg. How's that? First thing we do is we get Washington and Tallahassee's mandates and strict testing requirements out of the process, and we trust the teachers, the parents, and the students to make decisions that are right for the future of the kids, okay? And we have worked to do that in Washington, frankly, in a bipartisan way. A Republican Congress and President Obama have agreed on a law that begins to extract Washington out of this process. Now, I still think Tallahassee's too involved, in my opinion, but we're running for Congress. Charlie and I are, not for Tallahassee. Second thing is choice. We can have choice without abandoning investments in our public schools. We should invest more in our public schools than what we are seeing today. From the state to the local levels, we should invest in public schools. We should bring in the highest quality teachers we can to failing schools. We should keep those that have dedicated their lives to changing students' lives right now. Pull these schools out of where they are today and create quality education through additional resources and through recognizing the talent of teachers and parents who believe in and love and trust these kids. Let's move towards more individualized curriculums, recognizing not every student learns the same way. We can do that in the public school system. But for a parent who is trying to save their kid from a failing school, let's give them choice. Let's keep out opportunity scholarships in place that allow students from all walks of life to have the education that today might only be affordable to wealthier families, but for the Opportunity Scholarship Program and but for state-sponsored voucher programs that provide parents the choice to choose where they want to send their students. Let's have well-funded, quality public schools, but let's also empower families to choose where they send their students. I think we also have to recognize that not every kid is destined or wants to go to college. And let's invest in workforce training and skills training in the communities that need it the most, to partner an education pipeline with new jobs in communities that create the ability for individual students to graduate with a degree. I work with a lot of different industries, manufacturing industries. There are jobs. I was sharing with some ministers earlier today in the precision machine industry, a high-tech, clean manufacturing, high-wage professional job. They will hire anybody who walks in the door who's qualified to do it. So why don't we invest more in P-TECH and have our local county school board system invest in skills training and job training here in a community that we can create a pipeline towards successful jobs for those who don't choose to go to college. Provide quality public school education and choice for those who want to move on to higher education. Provide trade skills for those who choose a path other than higher education when they graduate. I think we can do it, and I think we can change lives.
I think you can see that on almost every point in this issue of education, we agree. It's that important that you have a forward vision that understands that our children don't get a second chance to go to elementary school or to go to junior high school or middle school or the high school. I would say beyond. The pastor secretary went to Lakewood. We both played quarterback there. And he was a lot better than me. But we got a good education when we went through. And 5 of the elementary schools at that time were not the subject of a Pulitzer Prize winning story. But those are the facts today. And we have to address that issue. And I would agree with the senator-elect that, you know, having more flexibility for those principals and those teachers, I've talked to them. And they feel it's sort of a top-down approach, you know, and maybe there's too much involvement from Clearwater, where the school board meets. You know, I first got exposed to the political process by my father, who ran for the Pinellas County School Board in 1966. And, you know, having been exposed to it and having 3 sisters, 2 of which were public school teachers here in Pinellas County, I've had the opportunity to see a lot about what happens in the classroom. And being personally a product of Pinellas County's public schools, that much more. I sat in those desks. You know, I learned from those teachers. And I learned that you need to respect those teachers and their hard work and their dedication, and they need to be rewarded appropriately. At one point, I served as education commissioner for the whole state. And it's about fairness. And it's about doing what's right for all the kids throughout this county and this state. And part of the problem is that these 5 schools are all in South St. Pete. What does that tell you? You know, I used to be an attorney general, and we would fight for justice every single day in that office. No matter what you look like, no matter where you came from, no matter what language you speak. Equal justice under the law is important. So I want to praise Representative Kathy Castor for bringing the issue to the attention. And in all fairness, this is not, David wasn't in his district at the time. So it was her duty to do that, and she did it. And, you know, Secretary Arnie Duncan came down, personally visited, the Secretary of Education, personally visited, and now there's an investigation about funding. You know, because flexibility is important. Investing and appropriate investing is important too. And so if schools in the north part of the county are getting more than schools in the south part of the county, that's not right. It's unfair on its face. So I'm glad that there's an investigation going on. I am optimistic about this issue. I think that our local leaders are on it. I think that the superintendent is focused, and I wish for the best.
Thank you. Our final question from me this evening. Pinellas County is a tourist destination for people from all over the world. The men and women who work as housekeepers, cooks, waiters, and other positions in hospitality receive some of the lowest pay. What are your thoughts about job creation, $15 an hour minimum wage, and opportunities to share in the Florida dream? And if I may add to that, about minority entrepreneurship, so that these are not just the jobs that minorities work in, but that we will become some of the owners of these jobs and these businesses that we work for.
Listen, this is an area where I probably break from my party more than most. Going back to the special election, I said I embrace the rather progressive principle of let's index the minimum wage and get politicians out of arbitrarily deciding what a wage should be, depending on which party's in control of Congress. We don't have many economists in Congress. I said that once to Alan Grayson, and he corrected me. He said, actually, I'm an economist, so I don't say no economist anymore. Look, the state of Florida currently is about 80 cents higher than the federal government. I think we should get the brightest economists in the world together in a room and say, what is an appropriate wage floor that creates the opportunity for people to have a sustainable living wage and grow off of that minimum wage while also protecting jobs. Yes. If we extract the politics out of this, folks, this is a macroeconomic question that comes down to how are families able to put food on their table, but also know that there are going to be sufficient jobs there in the future. I want to get people off of the minimum wage. I think we should index it and allow it to continue to grow over time, as we do in the state of Florida, so that employers can plan for those additional wage increases each year and build that into their budget. Here's my only fear with just an arbitrary hike, and it has to do with job loss. And this is true. I want to point you to a real example that's happening in real time right now in Pinellas County. So there are studies that say if you raise the minimum wage to X, you're going to reduce job growth. There are folks who say that's not true, and examples where that might not merit out true. This is why we need to solve this issue, but I want to give you a real example. The President's administration, in looking out for wages for people who are in salaried positions, has suggested that he wants to raise what's called the overtime rule and say that anyone who makes $27,000 a year in salary that is now being forced to work overtime, that's unfair. And so he wants to raise that limit to $46,000, $43,000. Well, if an employer has to raise wages arbitrarily from about $26,000 to $43,000, what happens? I'll give you 3 examples right here of companies I've met with. Some have made it work. Some employers who say we invest in our employees, they've made it work. They've given people raises. Others, there's a company up off of Ulmerton in Clearwater that's reduced all of their employees to 30 hours so that they can keep everybody employed and continue to provide health care. There's a golf course down the road that has 9 landscapers that all fall below the President's new requirement. You know what they're doing? They're going to let 3 of their landscapers go and then raise the salary of the 6 they keep up to the $43,000. We can take the politics out of this and just have a conversation about how do we create wage growth for everybody. I can tell you where I'm different than my party. I do think we need to see a minimum wage increase. We need to index it, create wage growth, but also protect jobs. Figure out in a bipartisan way how we do that.
It's a very important issue. You talked about in your question, Trevor, tourism, and then how it would relate to wages, and then how minorities can become business owners. Why don't we start with the last first, rather. I have met with several business groups at a restaurant over here on the Deuces, and barbershop owner, restaurant owner, and one of the consistent messages I get from them right here in this community is that when you go to the bank, you can't get a loan. That it's so difficult and so challenging that it drives them crazy. And in many instances, the barbershop owner specifically, he said, I just had to get some money of my own from my family in order to open up this small business and make it work. And it was hard to do. And I took a huge risk because I couldn't get any money from a bank. Well, what's a bank for? You know, you put money in there and save it and hopefully draw a little interest. Those rates have been low lately. But the other thing that banks are for, my dad used to be on the board of a bank here in Pinellas County, is to loan people money, give them an opportunity. And so I believe that there are things that Washington can do to free some of that capital up. And from what I hear in South St. Petersburg, it needs to happen to get more minority owners. So that's number one. Number two, I'm for raising the minimum wage. I think we need to ultimately get it to $15 an hour. You know, I meet people all day long that are having to work 2 and 3 jobs to make ends meet, to raise their kids, to feed their children. You know, and study after study after study, probably the best one, wherever the minimum wage has actually been raised, the local economy has done better. And David's right. One of the arguments that people make against doing so is the fact that they think people will lose their jobs if you raise the minimum wage. But think about it. If people at a business are making $15 an hour instead of, say, 10 or 8 or whatever it is, what happens to that individual? They get more money. Then arguably they have more disposable income. And now this gets to the tourism part of your question. They can go out to St. Pete Beach or Clearwater Beach and go to a decent restaurant. And what does that do? That keeps money keep going around in the economy, and everybody starts to benefit even more. It's not rocket science, but it is common sense. It can work. And we can help more minority owners exist by regulating banks appropriately and holding them accountable, by raising the minimum wage and putting more capital into our economy, local and nationally, and give them the opportunity to spend it on businesses that need to have that kind of business come through, like Cafe Creole.
I believe that we need to raise the minimum wage. We should push for $15 an hour across the board. But the most important point to land on is that which is livable and sustainable for the worker and for the employer. I'm also concerned about raising it to 15 arbitrarily. I don't know about y'all, but I walked into a Wawa a couple of weeks ago, and I went up to order a sandwich. And I stood there waiting on the young lady to come to me and take my order. And I guess I must have looked out of place, because she came around the counter and said, "You have to place it right here on this automated screen." Now, how many companies might do that? You've heard of the kiosks that might be coming to McDonald's if they raise the wage and can't pass the cost on. So I'm worried about that. Lastly, the point about businesses. I happened to be in the state of Minnesota a couple of months ago, keynoting the 40th anniversary of a substance abuse treatment center that I spent some time in back in the 80s. And there are only 2 black senators in the state of Minnesota, Jeff Hayden and Bobby Champion. And they were bragging to me about the $30 million appropriation that they were just awarded to incentivize, provide capital for black-owned businesses. Now, you know, can't be that many black businesses in Minnesota. And if they are, they're all in St. Paul and Minneapolis. But I came back and asked Albert Lee at the BBIC, the Black Business Investment Council, how much money does he get to invest in black businesses and give them access to capital? Statewide, they get $2.4 million. I say, well, brother, when I get elected to the Senate, I'm committed to quadrupling or making that at least $10 million so that our black-owned businesses and those who are searching for capital and for growth, expansion, and jobs can have access to a decent pool of money. It's going to take all of us working together. Sustainable wage, increase it, push for 15,